Well, hello and welcome to Community Group Week. I think that it is incredible that you have put yourself in this environment. This season of Christmas can be especially busy, and so that you have carved out time to be with people and you're intentionally wanting to grow to better love Jesus, each other in the world, is just an amazing step. So, way to go. You give yourself a nice little pat on the back for making the time to be a part of a community group today. Where we want to start, where we start every time we get together with community groups, is we ask this question, like, how are you doing really? Like, what's really going on the inside? And I think a great way to get at that is the couple questions that we ask at the beginning of every single community group. The first question is, what is it that you are thankful for? What's gone well over the last few days? What is it that, as you look back, is there things that you can just be really thankful for, and take some time to share that, think about that with the folks in your group. But then also, what are the things that have not gone well? What are you stressed about? Or maybe as you look forward to the next couple days or to Christmas, whatever it might be, what is it that's going to be a real challenge? And don't go through that alone. Share that with somebody else. And then lastly, last time we got together, we talked about the idea of just being people of integrity, telling the truth. And you've had a couple weeks to hopefully live that out, and maybe some wins, maybe some losses in that process. And so get some time to talk about that. How was that gone? As you went through Thanksgiving, as you went through time with family, how good were you of being just honest, telling the truth, being someone of integrity, not trying to, spin things to be better in your favor? Go ahead and share that with the folks in your group. So pause me and discuss for a little while with the folks that you're with this morning. Well, all right, today we are continuing going through the Sermon on the Mount, and today we are in Matthew 5:38 through 42, and trying to figure out what does it look like for us to follow and do the things that Jesus told us to do. And I think as far as teachings that Jesus had and things that he's telling us to do, at least for me, this is one of the more inspiring and convicting things that he teaches about. As we get started, I want to make sure that we are all on the same page of who I think this text is especially for. I think if you are someone who has ever been treated unfairly in your life, then this is for you. If you have ever had a boss that you felt like played favorites and maybe you weren't the favorites, then this is for you. If you've ever had a time where someone was divvying up money, whether, here's how much we're going to pay everybody, or maybe, where inheritance is going to go, and you felt like you didn't get your fair amount. If you ever thought, I think the government is kind of overreaching here a little bit in what they're telling us that we have to do. If you've ever had someone that you roll imaginary conversations with, because they did something to you in the past, and so you regularly have these imaginary conversations where you're telling them off, and in the conversation you're direct and you're articulate, and they feel just so bad about what they did because you finally got them told. If you have anybody in your life that if you found out that something bad happened to them, that they lost their job, they lost their house, that they gained weight, they lost some hair, you wouldn't feel bad for them. You would actually be a little happy that they were finally getting what they deserve. If you have anyone in your life that if they have hurt you, if they have wronged you, that your first response is that I hope that someday they hurt in the same way that they have hurt me, then this is for you. And I say all those because I hope that we all understand that I think that this is for all of us, because all of us have that little inch to get even and get revenge, and we often feel justified that that's what we deserve. But if we are going to be followers of Jesus, should we respond a different way? A couple things that I want to make sure you see in the text that you might not notice from reading it. First is Jesus is going to talk about this idea of someone getting slapped in the face. And that will hopefully bring up, and hopefully all throughout this conversation, lots of discussions about what do you do if something violent happens to you, how you respond. And I think that's a great discussion to have, and you should definitely jump as far and deep into that conversation as you want to go. But at least what Jesus is talking about here is he's talking about if someone is getting slapped in the face, which is obviously, physical violence, but is more of a sign of disrespect than like someone just being like beat up and really, like sent to the emergency room type stuff. This is someone who has been slapped. And I think there's just a distinction there that will be helpful as you guys go in your conversation. The second thing that I want you to know is just going to talk about this idea of a soldier or someone asks you to carry their pack. And what Jesus was talking about was that in that day, Israel was being totally taken over, invaded by the Roman Empire, and so they were being oppressed in many ways by this giant government that they had lots of disagreements with. And one of the government rules was that if a Roman soldier wanted to, they could make you carry their pack, their heavy pack, for a mile. It didn't matter if it was going to be out of your way. It didn't matter if you didn't want to. It didn't matter no matter what, if the government told you, they mandated that you had to follow their law. And Jesus is going to have a response to that. Next thing, we wonder as we read this, because it seems what Jesus is going to ask us to do seems so extreme and so radical. And so I think a question we ask is like, was Jesus actually serious? Like, is this actually how Jesus wanted us to live? Or is he like, being, hyperbolic here? Is he, just being like, setting out like a radical example? Or is this actually how Jesus wants us to live? And I think a good way to judge that is by looking not just at what Jesus said, but to look at what Jesus did. How did Jesus actually live out his life? How did Jesus live out these beliefs? Because one of the things that Jesus did is he asked us to not just believe in him, but to follow him, to actually look at the way he lived and try to emulate that with our lives. And so as we look at how Jesus dealt with people that oppressed him, that treated him poorly, and the most extreme example, of course, is when they put him on the cross. How did Jesus respond? The other thing that I think is important as we look at this text today is what is Jesus asking us to do? And I think that Jesus isn't asking us just to like stick our head in the sand and just like avoid, if there's bad things happening in the world, we're just going to like ignore it. I don't think that's what Jesus is saying. I think that Jesus thinks that we should absolutely stand up for justice. I think we should stand up for what is fair. I think we should stand up for what we think is right, especially if it's us or someone else being oppressed. We should stand up. But I think, and you can discuss, what Jesus is saying is that as we're standing up, we need a more creative, we need a more generous response than violence and revenge. I think Jesus is saying that we need to end the cycle oftentimes of revenge and violence, and we need to find a more generous, creative solution to this problem. Then, last thing as we go into this is Jesus in this, and again, all throughout this sermon, there would have been this like thought by the folks in the audience, and especially the religious leaders, of who does this guy think he is? Because Jesus is again taking what is a clear biblical Old Testament teaching, and Jesus is kind of going a different way, because it had been very clearly set in the law, Jesus is going to talk about it, that here's the way in which you handle something when something bad happens to you. And what the original law said was that if someone treats you poorly, then you can basically treat them poorly up to the level that they treated you, which back in Old Testament times, I think would have been a huge step forward, because oftentimes if someone hurts us, we want to like punch back even harder, So someone, takes a little bit from us, we're going to take a lot from them. And so the idea that Moses and in the law said that things are actually, you're only allowed to get revenge up to the point where it's even, would have been a big step forward. And that's how a lot of Old Testament rule lived, and it's still how a lot of people live. But Jesus is now going to take it to a new and more extreme, generous level of what we do when somebody wrongs us. And so a big thing people would have asked is like, who are you to kind of contradict Moses? Who are you to contradict what the law said? Who's for you to contradict? I mean, you go back to the Old Testament, and there's many times where it seems like that there's armies and there's battles and there's revenge happening. And a lot of times people will justify acts of violence. They will justify acts of just getting even with somebody, and they will reference something often in the Old Testament of the Bible. And they'll say, okay, I understand what Jesus said, but look what this other thing in the Bible says. And so I think it's important for us to know who Jesus is saying he is, the authority that he has, and what that means over the rest of the Bible. And as we read the Bible, how we decide how we are going to live. So I wanted to read you one of the ways that, I get information about these texts is I'll spend time studying different books called commentaries that talk about this. Is a commentary on the Sermon on the Mount by Scott McKnight, who's just great. I love him. And here's what he says. He says, let us ask ourselves this question in a more pointed way. Was Jesus not aware of the Old Testament and war and retaliation narratives when he said what he said in this and the next text? Indeed he was, which again is precisely the point. He did, and he still said what he said. Yes, one can justify war by appealing to the Old Testament. It's all set out in gory detail with divine justification. But this begs the question of how to read the Bible. What the Bible story does is this, is it takes us from Moses to Christ and says, now follow Jesus. It doesn't place Christ as equal alongside Moses or Elijah, which was Peter's temptation in Matthew 17. No, it says listen to him. Jesus is the one to whom we listen, and that means that the retaliation at work in the Torah, which prompted Israel's wars, has been set into a new cruciform reality. The wars of Israel say nothing to the follower of Jesus about how we should deal with our enemies. Again, we listen to Jesus are the words of the Father to Peter and to us. So, discuss today. And here's what you discuss. Read the scripture. Read Matthew 5, 38 through 42. Have someone read it. Have someone else put it in their own terms, kind of reframe it in kind of modern language, however you would say it to a friend. And then discuss these questions. What stands out to you? What do you think is interesting? What do you disagree with? What do you like? What do you not like? What is it that this tells us about God? Who is God like? And then what does this tell us about people? What does this tell us about what our natural reactions are and what we should be? And then these important questions. What would it look like if you were to take these teachings of Jesus and if you were to decide, I'm going to be a Jesus follower and I'm going to follow what Jesus said? What would that look like in your life this week, over the next few days, as you get ready for Christmas? And then maybe write an I will statement. And something I think for you to think about as you're writing your I will statement, I think a lot of us have had times where we felt like we handled conflict well, and then I'm sure many of us have stories where we felt like we did not handle conflict well, where we just blew it. And so what are the rhythms that you find that when you're in this kind of a mind frame, when you've been doing these kind of practices, they help you respond well when something doesn't go the way that you thought it was, when you've been treated unfairly? What are the things that help you be able to hold your tongue, not just fight back, but actually respond in a generous, creative, loving way that honors the other person, and write an I will statement based off of I will do this based off of what we just talked about today. And then finally, is there anyone else that you think could benefit from what we talked about today? So take some time in your group and discuss. And I'm excited to hear what happens in your guys' discussions, what happens in your lives as we all follow Jesus together. Talk to you soon.